Look, it's summer. There's not a whole lot going on in the college football world, so let's fantasize a little bit. What is it going to take for Notre Dame to make the college football playoff this season? And once they get there, what is the ideal path for them to win a national championship? That's all coming up in today's edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up? Welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. And today is Wednesday, June 26th. And thank you for getting your day started right here by making this your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018, and now I'm a producer at Fox Sports. And as always, you can watch the full episode on YouTube as well as every other full episode, and you can listen wherever you get your podcast. For those of you watching along, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Or if you're on the go and you're listening to the podcast, please take a quick second, rate the show 5 stars, leave a review if you're feeling extra generous today, and subscribe there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Okay, got a really fun show for you in store today. Luke Smith is going to join me here in just a second. We're going to break down the 3 keys for Notre Dame in order to make the college football playoff, and then we're going to daydream a little bit. We're going to fantasize about what would be the perfect path this season for Notre Dame to not only make the college football playoff, but then to win the national championship. Who would they play? How would the game go? And is it even a realistic possibility? We cover all of that. But before we get to Luke, this is your reminder that we got a mailbag coming on tomorrow's show. So if you want to be featured, get your questions in. You can drop them below in the YouTube comments, or you can send them to me on social media. The Twitter account is @LockedOnIrish, or you can just DM me on Instagram @LockedOnIrishPod. All right, let's bring in Luke. Okay, we got Luke Smith back on the show, and it is sort of that point in the calendar, right, where the season's getting a little bit closer, our expectations are getting really high, so we're like, know what? How about we just talk about how Notre Dame can win a national championship this season before our hearts get shattered once the season gets rolling? And probably not right away, but once we're, several weeks in, our expectations are even higher. But you know what? Let's have some fun today. Let's talk about what Notre Dame needs to do in order to make the college football playoff, and then we'll talk about what could happen once they get there. But let's start with that, Luke. What do you think are the 3 keys, some of the 3 benchmarks that Notre Dame needs to do in order to make that 12-team playoff?
So I think it starts week 1. They have to win in College Station. And I think that doing that really sets the table for them to potentially go undefeated and certainly puts them in pole position for the playoff. The opposite of that, losing that game, really puts them perhaps at a disadvantage the whole rest of the year. But that's number 1. The other 2, very, very briefly, they have what I'm going to call a 2018 level offensive line. And then the third one, they don't lose a game because of its offense. In other words, there are no offensive no-shows like there were last year against Clemson and even Ohio State. And I would probably go as far as saying Louisville too.
That Louisville game, I would consider it a no-show. Sam Hartman was addicted to throwing interceptions that game. That was really bad. All right, let's look at that 2018 offensive line, because I think you raised a good point, because there's some really good players on there, but they weren't at their full potential. So at left tackle, you have Liam Eichenberg in his junior year, left guard Alex Bars, center Sam Mustipher, right guard Tommy Kramer, and then at right tackle, Robert Hainsey. A lot of those guys ended up being really good players, but that was still very early on in their career. I don't really remember them being all that bad, although early on in the season, like that Ball State game, they really did struggle. So do you think that this year's offensive line could follow a similar path in that, hey, at the beginning of the year, it's rough, but then they sort of figure it out down the road?
I think the other thing is in 2017, Notre Dame won the Joe Moore Award, and coming off of last year, Notre Dame's losing 2 tackles that went in the first 2 rounds of the draft. So there's going to be a drop-off inevitably when you lose that amount of talent. And I guess, heck, the year before in 2017, they had 2 guys go in the top 10, right? So, like, it's kind of, I think, similar in that sense where you're losing some really high-end talent. And while there is a lot of talent that's potentially coming into the lineup, most of it hasn't really played a lot of football yet. So they did struggle at the start of that 2018 season. And I remember actually when we had Liam Eichenberg on after his career ended, he mentioned that he was a big proponent of it always takes a couple games for that offensive line to gel. And he pointed to the 2018 season as evidence of that. So by the end of that, they were a pretty good offensive line, but they definitely weren't as good as they were in 2017 or as they were in 2020. So I think that if they're at that level, as long as they don't disappoint, where I think there are some concerns about maybe they're just not going to be what we're used to seeing from Notre Dame offensive line. That's where they get themselves into trouble if that's the case.
Totally agree with everything you said. The only problem is your other key. Notre Dame needs to win in College Station, because it sounds like you believe that the offensive line is going to struggle a little bit at Kyle Field.
I wouldn't be surprised. I'll put it that way. There are very few games I can recall, openers, where I remember the Notre Dame offensive line looking good, to be honest. Even that 2020 season I mentioned, they didn't look that awesome against Duke. Now, granted, I don't know how much contact they had done prior to that, but they didn't look that great. 2021 against Florida State, that was kind of a weird game. They scored a lot of points, but I don't know that was great either. 2022 Ohio State obviously didn't have a whole lot of offense. Like, there haven't been a lot of times where the offensive line has looked awesome to start the year. And in some of those instances, that was with guys that had played a lot of football. So especially going up against what is the strength of the Texas A&M team, their defensive line, don't be surprised if they had some struggles. But that doesn't mean they can't win that game.
Do you think that if Notre Dame were to lose to Texas A&M in that season opener, are you just writing off the possibility of them winning out the rest of the way? Do you think that it would just kind of do too much damage, and then they would end up tripping up, maybe against Louisville, maybe against Florida State later in the season? Do you just think that, man, if they lose that season opener, it's going to be tough to just run the table?
I hadn't even necessarily thought about that, but I think that you raise a point. Like, I think what we saw last year with the Ohio State loss did. I don't think Notre Dame loses to Louisville or Clemson if they don't lose to Ohio State, to be totally honest with you. So, like, there is a domino effect these losses can have. I think more so my thought is the margin for error becomes so thin if they do lose that game, because the schedule is so weak. At least it appears to be right now. And nobody really knows what's going to happen with this 12-team playoff. Like, you see some people projecting 3-loss teams in there. If Notre Dame loses in College Station, then loses one of those other big games, like, I don't know if a 10-2 Notre Dame team gets into the playoff. I just don't.
Yeah, they really need Florida State to be really good, or at least like competing for the college football playoff. Like, if they end up just taking a big step back this upcoming season after what they did last year, and I mean, it's certainly a possibility. They lost a ton of guys, but they're also extremely active in the transfer portal. Like, I feel like Florida State should be good. So I do believe that there is a world where Notre Dame could lose a season opener and then kind of figure things out by the Louisville game and then go on a run there at the end of the way. Because if Notre Dame goes 11-1, I do think that they're going to make it. They won't have that 5th seed, but I'm with you in the sense that, like, if you lose that season opener, that could have a domino effect that could lead to losses down the road, just because the margin of error is so razor thin. Like, if you're in a tight game against Florida State late in the season, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, everything is on the line in this game. Whereas if they're undefeated going into that game, it's still obviously very important, but not quite the catastrophe that it could be if they end up losing that game. All right, so I'll start my keys before we finish things off. So I have Notre Dame. Their offensive line has to exceed expectations, which is a pretty vague way of saying it, but it does seem like right now the general consensus on that group, at least from the outside, the people who talk about the team for a living, are like, I don't think they're going to be that great. They're not going to be terrible, but they're not going to be that good. So if they end up being above average, potentially even a strength of the offense by the midway point of the season, then they're going to be in really good shape. My second one is a little bit more aggressive, maybe bold is a better term. I think Riley Leonard needs to be a Heisman contender. I don't think he needs to win the Heisman or anything like that, but if Notre Dame wants to make a run in the college football playoff, his name has to be thrown around in the mix. And odds are, if they're winning, if they're going undefeated, then Riley Leonard is probably a big part in that, and his name is going to be a part of those conversations. It's sort of like the chicken or the egg. I'm not saying that Riley Leonard needs to play like Jaden Daniels did last year for LSU, but I think he needs to play really well, and as Notre Dame racks up those wins, his name needs to be thrown around there a lot, because let's be honest, if Notre Dame had beaten Ohio State in that game, like, Sam Hartman would have been the Heisman favorite coming out of that game. So that's what I think we need to see out of Riley Leonard. Really impressive play. He needs to come up big in big games, and then we need to start talking about him as like, hey, man, this guy could be the first guy to win the Heisman since 1987 at Notre Dame.
Wow. I guess if we're talking about making a run through the playoff, then yeah, maybe you're right. Then maybe he does really need to be that guy. The thing is, I think Notre Dame's team is so good otherwise that to make the playoff, I'm not sure he needs to be that guy. I think that's where the distinction comes in. To make a run, sure, but to make the playoff, I'm not sure that he needs to be that guy.
Okay, how how good does the offense have to be? Like, let's say the defense is outstanding. They're as good as we think that they could be. They reach their full potential. They have one of the best defenses in the country. You already said that they can't lose any games because of their offense. But, like,
Right.
what is the worst version? What does the worst version of the Notre Dame offense look like that still makes the college football playoff? Because it would have to be better than last year.
I think it honestly probably looks something like the 2021 offense post the bye week. Like, that's the worst version of it. Like, once they figured out what they wanted to do, like that quick offense, kind of getting the ball out, it's still not like they lit the world on fire and it was a weaker schedule, but they did put up enough points. Like that's probably what I would equate it to. Okay, that gets you to the college football playoff.
Okay, I see that. I just think they need to be a little bit better. I guess maybe.
And you brought up the offensive line needing to exceed expectations. Like, if the offensive line was a strength of this team, I think I would probably view this team going into the season as most people viewed Michigan going into last season. Like, I would probably think like this team actually can win a national championship. If they had Joe Alt and Blake Fisher, I probably would go that far. They don't. So I'm not going that far yet. But if they had that, then I would think like, okay, then maybe they can be that team. And that's why I'm saying they just need to be okay, because I still think the rest of the team is so good.
Yeah, maybe this is just wishful thinking too with Riley Leonard. I just want Notre Dame to have a quarterback that can really do that. And I just think that, for all our concerns about Riley Leonard as a passer, and I feel like from the very beginning, if you go back to the Duke game last year and the way that we talked about it, we were not like that impressed by him. But again, I think that's all relative to the conversation about him going into that, where they're like, oh, this guy's going to be a first, second round NFL draft pick down the road. I was like, I just don't see that.
Yeah.
But the more and more I think about it, so long as he stays healthy, I think he's going to run for like 600 to 700 yards, even though Notre Dame has two great backs. So even if he isn't the most accurate thrower of the ball, he's going to rack up a ton of touchdowns on the ground.
No doubt about that. Is it Kaiser that holds that record for single season rushing touchdowns in a season? I think it might
15.
be
15.
Yeah, he could definitely challenge for that.
And that was a Mike Denbrock-led offense. I'm going back to that year. He did have 10 touchdowns on the ground that year, 520 yards. And, I think Riley Leonard is a much better runner than Kaiser, although they're going to be used in a similar fashion. Like, Notre Dame loved running that QB power with the pulling guards there, especially in the red zone. That was so effective. So you take what Kaiser did that year, so he ran for 520 yards, 10 touchdowns. If Riley Leonard can do better than that, which I think he can, and then you add in the fact that Notre Dame is a much better receiving core, like if he's in the Heisman contenders list, they got a real shot at making a run there. Okay, so those are only two, though. I haven't mentioned my third. And it might seem critical, but it's just if Notre Dame wants to be, the fifth seed, basically, I think the defense has to not only maintain their effectiveness against the pass, and they were number one in pass efficiency defense last year. They had, just an unbelievable secondary. They also need to be in the top 20 in rush defense as well. They were not last year. They finished 28th in rush yards per game allowed with 119 per game, which doesn't really seem like that much. But then you look at their losses. They allowed 176 yards against Clemson without their starting running back. I mean, hell, we made Phil Maffa look like a Heisman contender, speaking of the Heisman. They also allowed 186 rushing yards against Louisville. That is gross. That should never happen. And then against Ohio State, the run defense was actually really solid, but they did allow that 60-plus yard touchdown run to Travion Henderson. It was a great play by him, but it was like in all of their losses, you could point to some of the biggest blown opportunities on defense was all stopping the run. Like, they shut down the passing game. So I think that they really need to elevate that this year, which is, going to be tough to do without J.D. Bertrand and Maris Leofow, two linebackers who just played so many snaps. Now, they're going to be a little bit younger, maybe a little bit more athletic there at the linebacker position. But I do think that for as good as the defense was last year, that is one big area they need to improve upon, at least in the big games.
Totally. And you mentioned the 176 against Louisville. As if I'm doing the math correctly now, 66 of that was on two long touchdown runs by Jawar Jordan too. So I think that kind of relates to my point on the offense, not losing a game because of its offense with no offensive no-shows. Defense just can't kind of have those lapses. And it sounds really picky. I get that, but that was the difference in the Ohio State game ultimately. So I'm with you on that. And it's the Maffa thing. I remember I had an Uber
Like
driver.
4 touchdowns.
I had an Uber driver the night before telling me he thought Shipley sucked and Maffa was better. He might have been right. So, anyways, can't have that repeat on any level this year, and especially Louisville's probably gonna have a shifty guy again. Can't have that.
Yeah, the Louisville and Ohio State runs, you could chalk that up to big plays, but Clemson was getting push every time, and that was more of like a sustained, dominant
All
effort
white
from-
uniforms.
Okay, well, we might have to talk a little bit about the uniforms. There might be a new change, but we'll see if we have time for that. Luke's going to rejoin me here in a second to talk about Notre Dame's potential path to winning a national championship. But first, I wanted to tell you about Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. And with great last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. Whether you've been planning to go to a game for weeks or you're feeling spontaneous and want to hit up the nearby ballpark, Gametime is the perfect place for you. It's the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the views from your seat on your phone before you buy, but my favorite thing about Gametime is the pricing shows your total costs up front, and you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Okay, let's say now Notre Dame accomplishes all these goals. They make the college football playoff. What do you think, if we were to break it down 1 through 12, what is the ideal path for Notre Dame to win a national championship? Just make it, right? Not just in terms of like the easiest path, but also let's have some fun along the way. Let's watch some big games and really enjoy those wins a little bit more. Because again, we're fantasizing a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking if they go 12-0, then they're going to be the 5 seed in all likelihood, right? And that's awesome. You get to play most likely that group of 5 champion or group of whatever it is champion now in the opener at home. I think like a night game in South Bend in December just sounds fantastic. For this purpose, let's call it Air Force. I think that'd be fun. And then, hey, we'd really, especially this year, complete the trifecta of playing all 3 service academies, which hopefully we'll never do again, but maybe that would happen.
I don't know if I love that, to be honest with you. The fact that we have to play 2 this year, and I just probably set some people off, but like, yeah, I was thinking about taking Air Force there. I really struggled to find like a fun group of 5 team that actually has a realistic chance of making the college football playoffs. So for my 12 seed, I took Tulane. Okay. They don't have Michael Pratt, so they're not as much of a threat probably, but they seem to have a pretty good program in place. Some of the other options are like UTSA.
Had a new coach though, right, Tulane?
Yeah. There's UTSA, doesn't move the needle for me at all. App State just scares me. I just think if Notre Dame plays App State at the 12, I'm going to be so much more nervous about that game than any other team because they just love to upset teams on a big stage. So I don't want to go with them. So I don't know. Tulane, even though the game's not going to be in New Orleans, like they seem to be like a pretty fun school, but I don't think they'll have a ton of success coming to South Bend in early December.
Yeah, I think I would feel the same way playing Boise State too. I'd be really petrified of that. And we are playing them now next year, right? So that's already kind of being taken care of. So
yeah, Boise State has a shot too.
That would be another scary one. Yeah. So assuming that Notre Dame beats Air Force, right? They're the 5 seed. My top 4 is Georgia, Ohio State, Utah, and Clemson as the top 4 ranked conference champs. So that would set up a second round matchup with Clemson, which is sneaky, maybe Notre Dame's like not biggest rival right now, but it's close, I would say. I mean, USC obviously is always going to be up there, but over the last decade, Clemson's probably Notre Dame's biggest rival. Is that a crazy thing to say?
I asked this question around the time that Notre Dame was about to play them last year. I think I got it in a mailbag or something. I was like, is Notre Dame Clemson a rivalry? I was like, it's absolutely a rivalry now, especially now.
Over the last 10 years, too.
Yeah, they keep going back and forth. Like, it's a very competitive rivalry. It hasn't been dominated by one side. I would also put, maybe this is just like fans on Twitter, Notre Dame, Ohio State is kind of building. It's not a legitimate rivalry yet. They just haven't played enough. But Notre Dame and Ohio State are constantly going at it on the recruiting trail. So it's always kind of like there's like a competing interest where like outside of Will Shipley, I mean, I can't really remember a ton of guys that Notre Dame, it really came down to the wire between Clemson and Notre Dame in recent years. So it's all on the field. So it's still a really good rivalry, but I feel like in terms of like the fan bases going at it, you don't hear about Clemson as much.
You don't. I know there was that Sammy Brown kid Notre Dame was in on early at Clemson got, but I don't think it came down to the wire like that. So you're right. But I think that's a great opportunity to continue that rivalry and hopefully knock them off in a second-round playoff game.
Okay, so I was thinking about putting Clemson there because I do think that they have a chance to win the ACC, but I'm actually going to go with Florida State as the winners of the ACC. Notre Dame would beat them in this scenario, but my top 4 is going to be Ohio State, Texas, Florida State, and Utah. This is it's partially wishful thinking. I'm just going to be honest, because as a known SEC hater, I think it would be so funny if Texas waltzed in the SEC, and I don't even really like Texas. But if they were to go into the SEC and win it in their first year, it really would hurt the ego a little bit of all the people who say that, SEC football is so different, all this stuff. And it reminded me of when Missouri in the Chase Daniel era, way back when Missouri and Texas A&M joined the SEC for the first time, and then Missouri went to the SEC championship after they had talked so much trash about the Big 12 for so long. I think we could potentially see a similar scenario. Also, Texas has like a really easy SEC schedule. I think they gave Oklahoma all the hard games and they gave Texas all the easy ones. So Texas actually has a real shot at winning it. And that's why I have them at number 2. I mean, Ohio State's roster is absolutely loaded. If they don't win the Big Ten, Brian Day is probably gone. So they have to do that. And like I said, I got Florida State at 3. I've got Utah at 4, which means Notre Dame would have to play Utah in a bowl game. And that would scare the hell out of me because I just have a ton of respect for Kyle Whittingham and the program that he's built over there. And they also play a very similar brand of football. Just we're going to smash you just like with running the ball, very physical defense, all that stuff. So it would be a really competitive game. It would not, I don't want to say a rock fight because, I mean, they do have Cam Rising. Notre Dame has Riley Leonard, but that would be a new matchup, and I think it'd be a lot of fun.
It would. That Big 12 was also very hard for me to pick out. Like, I guess Utah is going to be the team in the top 4, although I guess there's a world where maybe they're not. I had Kansas in here as well at 10, which feels a little bit ambitious. But
yeah, give me the rest of your top 12.
Yeah, so after 5, which is Notre Dame, we got Oregon at 6, Bama at 7, Texas at 8, Mizzou at 9, Kansas at 11, Florida State at 11, and then Air Force at 12, like I mentioned previously.
All right, so just to give people an idea of what your second round would look like. So Notre Dame wins that game. You'd have, in the first round, you'd have Oregon playing Florida State, which would be a lot of fun. Bama playing Kansas, not a whole lot of fun. I think that'd probably be a bloodbath. And then Texas playing Missouri. So in mine, I've got Notre Dame at 5 as well because, again, easiest path to success. At 6, I've got Georgia. They would be playing LSU. So, again, even though LSU without Jane Daniels, they're probably going to take a little bit of a step back, but I don't know. I still think that their defense is going to be vastly improved from last season, although admittedly that's a pretty low bar to clear. At 7, I've got Oregon. They would face off against Alabama, which would be a ton of fun, especially considering how many people from Alabama wanted Dan Lanning to become the head coach there once Saban left. I think that'd be a really fun matchup. And then another SEC matchup in the 8-9 game between Ole Miss and Missouri. So even though those really wouldn't factor into Notre Dame's path because they're on the other side of the bracket, I think there's a couple games there that would be a really, really fun. So now let's get back to Notre Dame. I've got them playing Utah. You've got them playing Clemson. Rematch there. So if they get past Clemson, who would they play?
We got Georgia there in the semi, which I think kind of makes it real. Like if you were to go and win that game, make the national championship games, like you just beat a team that's won 2 of the last 3 national titles. You kind of owe them 2 for the last 2 times you played, where you kind of let 2 get away too. And just it's Kirby Smart. It's like it's the gold standard in college football right now. So that to me would just be, I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine. I won't lie, but it would be awesome. As we're talking about this though, like if we're talking about fun paths, I kind of think what we should have done, or what I should have done, was had LSU number 1. So it's Notre Dame beating Brian Kelly to get to a national championship game.
I thought about that. That's literally the only reason why I put him in there, just so that there's like the thought, the potential of, oh my God, could this be? Even though it's very unlikely that LSU is in that position because the SEC is just so loaded this year. But that's why I put them in there. But I couldn't bring myself to put them up that high. So one thing that I was thinking about, though, as I was doing this exercise, like I feel like a lot of people, I mean, I saw Pete Sampson from The Athletic put out his fan survey, and a lot of people would say that, you know, they would look at this season as a success if Notre Dame is able to win one game in the college football playoff. But when you really break it down, you're like, okay, they win a game against the Group of 5 team. That should be the expectation. Then they're probably playing the winner of the Big 12 or the ACC. They should be able to win that game too. Like, the more I'm thinking about it now that we really break down, okay, this is what the playoff format would look like. If Notre Dame is as good as I think that they could be, I think it should be winning 2 games because they aren't going to be playing the winner of the Big Ten or the SEC in that second round matchup first for them. You know what I mean?
Right. No, I agree 100%.
All right. So I would have Notre Dame playing Ohio State, you know, assuming they knock off Utah. And that just seems fitting because they've come so close. They came so close to beating them last year. And I don't want to say that it would like make that game go away entirely just because I don't think I'm ever going to forget the pain of leaving that stadium and just how great that weekend could have been. Like, it's always going to sting, but somehow, some way, if Notre Dame were to knock off Ohio State in the college football playoff, it'd be the first time they beat Ohio State since like the 1920s. That would be so awesome. And it also just seems more realistic than beating Georgia because they've come so close. And I guess maybe this year, I don't really put Ohio State on that same pedestal as Georgia. But man, if they were able to knock them off, not only would it feel real, it'd be like, okay, we've just exercised a lot of demons from the past, and it would be even more satisfying.
So that is why I have Ohio State on the other side of the bracket at number 2, where the Irish would potentially play them in a national championship game because, yeah, like you said, I don't know if it's ever going away, but that's the only way I might ever be able to, like, kind of forget about what happened on that night in September where anyways, somebody dropped an interception and all that. It would just be,
you know how
Ohio
often
State.
That comes up when you and I talk. It's like disgusting. Part of me is like, we need to move on, but it's like, maybe this is just what it is.
We need to put a curse on it or something that like, I don't know, something
like a swear jar.
Yeah. But you beat Ohio State, win the national championship, and you also take Ohio State's chance away from winning a national championship in Ryan Day. I mean, it doesn't get better than that. So that's kind of up there for me.
Dude, if Notre Dame wins a national championship, I might forget about every loss ever. I might go out in a blaze of glory that night.
Yeah.
I won't need to see or feel anything else. That is the one experience that I can't, it's like almost hard to imagine, but hey, we're imagining it today. So obviously Ohio State would be off. They'd be out in my bracket because I got Notre Dame beating them in the semifinals. I tried to go weird with this one. I was like, okay, you know, could it be Oregon? Could they sneak in there? And this is dumb, and I'm admitting that it's dumb, but like, it's so hard for me to think that Oregon is just going to beat Georgia because of what I watched a couple of years ago in that season opener. And I understand that was the first game of the Dan Lanning era. The teams are so different compared to then, but I just think it's hard to imagine right now. I think the world of Oregon and their program, I think they're really just on the rise, and they're going to be one of the best teams in college football every single year for as long as he's there. But Georgia's just a different beast, especially in the college football playoff. Like, they've been there, done that. Even in the 12-team format, they're not going to be scared. So I think Notre Dame would face off against Georgia in the national championship. And if they manage to beat what I have, Tulane, Utah, Ohio State, and Georgia, like, this is the part of the exercise that makes it not as fun, because earlier I was like, oh, wow, man, Notre Dame really could win 2 playoff games this year. And then I'm like, okay, so what happens if they do? They have Ohio State and Georgia. Yeah. They would have to win both of those games. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, we still probably got a few more. We got a few more years left before we can really seriously talk about a national championship. But hey, it's possible.
On June 25th, you can talk about it, though. That's all that really matters.
Again, this is how it works. It's cyclical. We're getting close this season. Expectations are getting high. You talked to me on like the 5 minutes before kickoff during that Notre Dame Texas A&M game when the crowd is going, Notre Dame's coming out in the field. I'm going to be like, dude, we're winning a national championship. Are you kidding me? look at this. Look at this team. Look at how good Riley Leonard looks in white and gold. But before we let you go, I feel like we've kind of settled it with the perfect path to a college football playoff and a national championship. We did get a mailbag question that is specific to you. This one's really good. This one's from @DannyFeldmeyer. What is Luke's stance as a Bears fan in the Caleb Williams era? I'd rather have Mike Glennon back, says Danny, and I'm just going to lay out because I've been dying to know. We have not really talked about this yet since they drafted him.
Have we not talked about
this? You have expressed severe displeasure with him.
Let me preface this with saying I think he's going to be a phenomenal NFL quarterback, and he might even win the Bears the Super Bowl, which is great. However, I disown the Bears. I am an LA Rams fan. I bought a Kyron Williams jersey, watched the NFL draft with a bunch of Bears fans, and kind of hid that jersey until the Bears made their pick and then showed it. I mean, like, it's kind of one of those things, like, line in the sand. I can't root for that guy. And it's not because I don't think he's good. I do. I was at that game in the Coliseum that night with you, and I thought that night in South Bend would have given me, like, it would have taken care of all that. It didn't. Still hate the guy. So I'm not a Bears fan anymore. It's okay. That's on my echelon of or pantheon of sports teams is very low for me. Anyways, it's kind of always just cherry on top if they're good. But yeah, I'm a Rams fan now.
I knew that you bought the Rams jersey. I didn't know that you completely disowned the Bears. I thought it might be maybe you were going to be open to the idea of potentially rooting for them down the road. How funny would it be, though, if they do win the Super Bowl and you can't even enjoy it a little bit? That would just be like the universe twisting the knife a little bit, where you get a championship. Now, you already have one. You got the 2016 World Series. That was a pretty good one to get, I would say.
Yeah.
I still think about that one. But if they were to win it all, and you just couldn't enjoy it, that'd be so much more brutal than if they just sucked, right?
Totally. But I do kind of think my victory lap is going to be amazing if he does suck, even though I don't think he's going to be bad. I actually think he's going to be really, really good, which is going to be unfortunate. But it's like I told you, this guy was a bust, even though that's actually not what I'm saying. But
this conversation, you planting the flag about Caleb Williams, the Bears, means that he's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about that.
There's literally no doubt that Caleb Williams is not only going to be a good quarterback, he's going to be generational solely because you disowned them.
One last note. I went to Soldier Field for a concert the other night, and that place is such a freaking dump that I am actually thrilled I don't have to go to games there anymore, because getting in and out of there is enough to take years off your life.
What is the latest? Weren't they thinking about moving to Arlington?
Yeah, I mean, there's a million different plans out there. I don't think any of them are going to happen. And I also think the city is about to incur some serious debt on Soldier Field because all the debt was backloaded to the end of the contract. So they've got some problems to sort out.
Okay, last one. I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's not been made official yet. But can I just get your instant reaction to a potential change in the Notre Dame uniform? We saw some pictures of new Notre Dame jerseys being sold at the bookstore. It's one change, but it's significant. The ND monogram on the sleeves, rather than being the traditional white with gold trim, might just be straight up gold. We started to see it in the EA Sports trailers. What are your thoughts?
Jerseys typically look better on players, and that's maybe just a general note, and I know I just said I bought a Kyron Williams Rams jersey, but just grown men probably shouldn't wear jerseys. That's general.
Wow, that was a switch up. Yeah, and he's younger than you.
but they don't look good. And the picture I saw, it looked like something you would buy at checkout at Walmart or a Meijer for 30% off, which is awesome. But that's not what the Notre Dame football uniform should look like.
Yeah, it's like if you walked into a Martin's in South Bend and you saw it, you'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, definitely a knockoff, but I'm buying a $25 jersey at Martin's as opposed to the real jersey from the bookstore. Again, not official yet. I'm going to hold off. I'm just going to say I did not really like it. Maybe I think it could look better with the white uniforms. Don't really love it on the blue. I think if they make a change to the pants and get the color to look more gold, then I think maybe that'll soften the blow a little bit. Fans will be a little bit more excited about the uniform change. But that's all I got. You got any final thoughts before we let you go?
No, but glad that we already are planting the flag for these playoff paths in June. So we'll see. We'll have to see how those turn out in 7-8 months from now.
I know. I'm looking forward to the trolls who always seem to find the episode with you on it.
They don't
one
like
way
me.
or another, they will find a way. Opposing fans were like, this Luke Smith guy is on Locked On Irish again. Let's blast the comments. But hey, all publicity is good publicity, I guess. And I think, when the season's over, we're going to look back at this and be like, wow, we're idiots. Or we're going to be like, hey, maybe we were smarter than everyone else and we were on it a little bit early.
Yeah, probably not that, but worth saying.
All right. And on that note, we'll end it on a very optimistic tone. All right. I'll talk to you later, bro.
Later.
All right, that is a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. As a reminder, tomorrow's episode will be another mailbag. So if you've got questions you want answered on the show, send them my way. You can drop them below in the YouTube comments, or you can tweet me at Locked On Irish or DM me on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. Also, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.